Brian and I are going to share the next part of this presentation. I'm going to talk about the model in brief, how it works, how it's structured. And I'm also going to explain some of the modelling we've done, which is with Barry Berg and idea, which is just to see, it's a kind of an exercise in trying to project the range of possible impacts of the fund in terms of not just employment, but films made and impact on the and returns to the fund itself, so the cost to government, if you like. That's where I want to be. So very briefly, I think we've covered most of this. It's $60 million over 3 years. It's actually, you know, we've modelled this on a few different numbers, but at $60 million, it's a fairly modest proposition. I think 60 million is about the annual production investment allocation at Screen Australia. This is a 60 million allocation, not in 1 year, but over 3 years. So it's a modest proposal. It's a step in a new direction. As Tony said, this is a loan fund. It's not an equity fund, and this is quite fundamental not only to the outcomes of the fund, but to the commercial operation of the fund, and we'll explain more about that. I think the key thing to understand here is that when you're looking at loans, they obviously recoup ahead of equity. Equity is usually the last little bit, or the last big bit of the financing of the film. It's the last to recoup, and it's therefore has the poorest returns profile. So investing loans essentially at the distribution level produces automatically, in a sense, a rather different outcome to the sorts of outcomes you would expect with equity investment. We'll spend a lot of time on that. It's an important point. One of the things we've done in the way we've structured and modelled this fund is that we've said it's the same terms for all. So when a distributor or when a producer comes to the managers of this fund, it's not a negotiation. It's not like you're coming in and saying, okay, well, let's start talking about what kind of deal we might do here. It's going to be the same deal for all. And there's lots of good reasons for that. Obviously, it means that everybody understands what the deal is, so there's a degree of certainty about how the fund's going to operate. Everyone's going to get the same deal. The other thing is that you don't get into a kind of ratcheted down outcome where somebody negotiates really good terms for one film, and then, you know, those same terms are carried on into the next negotiation that occurs, until you suddenly find that this loan fund is actually a very subordinated equity fund after all. In other words, in order to maintain a negotiating posture, it's important that there be the same set of rules for all, that the terms not vary film to film. But if they did vary, I think it would be very hard to maintain the kind of priority that we've proposed that the fund would have in recoupment. Again, we'll probably spend a bit more time on that, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that. It's a big question. We've proposed that the fund be managed by Screen Australia. Essentially, we're not saying that it would be a fund that would be managed like the ordinary production investment funds that Screen Australia has. It would be a discrete fund that it would manage. The reason to do that, apart from the fact that, you know, Screen Australia obviously houses, you know, the relevant expertise, is that the government generally is obviously opposed to proliferation of entities. It's scooped all the entities together into one just a few years ago. I think that gives you a pretty good indication of the thinking about, you know, proliferation of entities. In other words, we can't see a case being sustained for there being some kind of separate entity to manage this fund. Therefore, it would logically sit with Screen Australia. And then we've said we've modelled the fund on the assumption that it would operate for a period of years, and then it would be wound up. And so we projected that it would be wound up after 5 years. Hope that's all making sense so far. Now, I talked about the same terms for all, so let me just step through what those terms would be. This is a recoupment schedule. The proposition is that in terms of recoupment from gross rentals of a film, the distributor would first of all recoup marketing and release costs of the film. So all the release costs incurred in the release of the film would be recouped first position. That's normal. It's not preferential, it's just the normal deal. In second position, the distributor recoups 50% of their commissions. Now, instead of recouping all of their commission as they would normally do at this point, they're recouping 50%. That's obviously a concession by the distributor, but you'll see that the fund itself is making a concession in that it's deferring its recoupment of interest. So the benefit that a distributor makes by investing in advance in a film is its commission. The benefit that the fund makes by its investment in a film is interest. The distributor recoups its 50% of its commission in second position. The fund recoups its interest in fifth position. We'll get to that in a minute. Third position, distributor and fund recoup their advances pro rata pari passu, so they're in the same boat. The loan is obviously not recourse to the distributor, so if the film goes south and doesn't do much business, the distributor is not liable to repay the loan. But they do have to consider, in making an investment in a film, in putting an advance into a film, they have to consider whether the film is capable of supporting not just their advance, but the fund's advance as well, because both have to be recouped pro rata pari passu. So, in a sense, I think some of the time with the quite small advances that distributors make in films, they're not really on the hook very much, and there's almost what economists rather grandly call the moral hazard problem. There's a problem about whether their signal is a reliable signal of commerciality. In this scenario, I think the model is that the signal that's coming from the distributor, the signal of their investment in the film, is a very strong signal. They're not going to be. This is not a faint-hearted investment by a distributor. This is a distributor stepping up to the plate, wanting to make a film, and taking a position that contemplates not just recoupment of its position, but recoupment of the fund's position. Fourth position, distributor recoups balance of commission. Fifth position, the fund recoups its interest. So the fund is, from the point of view of the fund, it is fairly preferentially slanted to the distributor, because the loans are not recourse to the distributor, and the interest is only recouped after everything else has been recouped. So it's not fully commercial by any means in its operation. Now, we did some modelling of this, and I need to probably preface this by saying a little bit about what is the point of modelling. It's not to give you pinpoint projections of what is going to occur in the future. We need a time machine for that, not a model. You don't have a time machine. It's an exercise in trying to understand probable ranges of impacts. It's to give you a range, not a pinpointed outcome. It's to give you the ballpark, not a pinpoint. So we've done an exercise which is trying to get into the ballpark of understanding how this fund would impact the industry and how it would, and what its outcomes would be financially. To do that, we've made some assumptions. They're obviously simplifying assumptions. Obviously, a model is a bit like a map. The map will one-to-one correspondence with the terrain. It's no map at all. You have to simplify to get to anything. A model simplifies in the same way that a map simplifies. We've assumed an average film budget of $15 million. We've assumed that P&A spend is around 10% of the production cost. In terms of the structure of the financing, we've assumed that an Australian distributor is contributing about 8% of the financing, a rest of world distributor is contributing 25%, the film fund is contributing 33%, and the producer offset 33%. We've done some, in the course of the modelling, we did some sensitivity testing where we varied these assumptions just to see what the different impacts were. It doesn't make a heck of a lot of difference, to be honest, but certainly one can play with these assumptions till the cows come home, generating new scenarios. We've chose these things because they seem to us to be broadly representative of the kind of deals that might be done. We assumed distributor commission at 30%, and we assumed an interest rate of 12%. Again, this can be varied. Clearly, the most important thing to think about is, okay, so these films get made, what happens? And we've tended to think about, we've thought about it in a probabilistic way. And this is a probability distribution, the probability curve, if you like, that we used in the base case that we developed in the model. And we ran several cases, but this is the base case that we reverted to. And to explain this, it's a little bit complicated. What we're saying is, on the left there, you're looking at a result. You're saying, you know, let's consider a position where, or consider a film where the recoupment is 20%, the gross rentals of the film are 20% of the production cost, right? And then we've said there's a case at 50%, there's a case at 66%, 75%, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, we said, what is the probability of each of those things occurring? Okay, so we said, for our modelling purposes, that the probability of that if you made 10 films, one time out of 10, the film would recoup 20%. The gross rentals of the film would be 20% of the production cost of the film. Everyone got that? So if you can get your head around this, this is a kind of key step in the model. We said a quarter of the time, 2.5 times out of 10, that the film would recoup, the gross rentals of the film would be equivalent to 50% of the production cost of the film. Then we looked at the 66% case and we said, okay, another quarter of the time, 2.5 films out of 10, the film will recoup 66%. That is, the gross rentals of the film will be equivalent to 66% of the production cost, and so on. So what you'll see here is that we're saying about 80% of the time the film, it does not, the gross rentals of the film do not completely recoup the production cost. It's not a, you know, we're not being wildly adventurous here. This recoupment schedule, in fact, you know, when I look at it, what I see is the typical recoupment schedule of a major distributor, where most of the films they make actually don't recoup the advance or the production cost. But the case for the distributor, of course, is always predicated not just on the recoupment of the production cost or advance, but on the commissions that are earned. Okay, so you've got to add back in the commissions to understand the distributor's financial decision. We did have one case here, you'll see, where we allowed the possibility that one film out of 10 might recoup 200%. That is, the gross rentals might be 200% of production cost. And we've also one out of 10 where it was 150%. So we're allowing for, you know, some films that are hit films. Again, you know, it's possible to come up with different schedules of different probability distributions, different curves, but this seemed to us to roughly match the kind of results that are seen when you examine what little data there is about the financial performance of major distributors. Okay, so outcomes. In this base case that I've just described, the Australian distributors in the equation, on balance, together, on average, recoup about 79% of their advances. In other words, in the base case, in the expected average case, they recoup only 79% of their advance. Now, of course, as Harold Vogel, the financial analyst, once said, you know, you can drown in a river with an average depth of 6 inches. Averages can be misleading. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of variation around an average, and if you want to dig into the model that we built, you can see the variation around averages. But the averages, well, they're what they say. Now, again, you've got to understand the Australian distributor's position. You would need to add back in the commissions that they would earn. And I haven't done that for this purpose. I'm saying they're recouping 79% of their advance, and I'm not looking at what their commissions might be.
Is that an Australian films you're talking, or right across the an Australian distributor slate?
No, this is right across the slate of films that the fund participates in. So it's not looking at the rest of their activity. And again, we've said that the rest of world distributor, whoever is taking the rest of world position, recoups on average about 65% of advances. The reason there's a variation there is that Australian films tend to do slightly better in Australia than they do overseas. Once again, to understand the rest of world distributor's position, you would need to add back in the commissions to see what their final financial outcome was. Moving down, we see that the fund, the PDFF, recoups about 73 cents in the dollar. And of that 73 cents in the dollar, about 68 cents is recovery of loans, and about 5 cents is interest. Okay, so it's making a little bit of interest on the films that perform well, and on the others, of course, it doesn't make any interest because it doesn't recoup its advance. And similarly, in the average case, and the averages are very misleading, or can be, the producers who have put up the offset, or let me put it another way, the offset recoups about 30% of its contribution. So it's in an equity position, it's last, that's why it's not doing as well as everyone else. If you look in the modelling, it's highly influenced by whether or not there are any successful films. And so once again, in the majority of cases, the return to the producer from the offset would be less than that. This is a skewed outcome, skewed by a small number of successful films, as we saw back here. Okay, has everyone got that? This is complicated thought. Okay. And I think, I don't want to steal your thunder, Brian. My last bit. So in the model, when we ran it on these assumptions, and with this probability distribution, we obtained a result of 17 films financed over a period of 3 years. There is some to achieve that result. There is some reinvestment by the fund in that 3-year period. Not a lot, but there's some. Obviously, the ability to reach 17 films would depend somewhat on the performance of the fund. If the performance were less, then there would be fewer films financed. The minimum number of films financed on our assumption of an average $15 million film and an average $5 million investment would obviously be 12 films. The losses of the fund, when it's wound up after 5 years, in our model are $28 million. So roughly nearly a half of the funds are lost after a 5-year period. The present value of the subsidy is a slightly different figure because, of course, there's operating costs of the fund. Present value of the subsidy is $31 million. So the financial proposition to government is, it's going to cost you $31 million to run this fund, get these outcomes, these 17 films.